Hello, my sleepy heads. It's good to have you back on History for Sleep. In the following minutes, you will experience a deep state of relaxation. This story helps you to easily sleep through the night, so you can get up energized in the morning. Not only will you fall asleep faster, you will also get rid of disturbing thoughts. Listen to these history stories for at least 10 days for the best results. The longer you listen to the video, the more likely you'll experience persistent and positive changes in the way you sleep. I wish you a great rest, and if you haven't already, we'd be very happy if you consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss any new calming and relaxing history story. Tonight, we're going to slowly journey into the world of the Vikings, a land of icy seas, wooden longhouses, and restless horizons. Viking Times, a world of roaring hearth fires and endless toil, where survival was as harsh as the northern winters yet as enduring as the sagas whispered by the skalds. Over the next couple of hours, we'll imagine what a single day might have been like for the ordinary people who lived beneath the shifting skies of the north. Their meals, their labor, their beliefs, and the constant struggle to endure both nature and fate. So settle in, let the weight of the present drift away, and together we'll step softly into a past both brutal and unforgettable. Before you get comfortable and let your mind drift into this ancient world, I'd love it if you could take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if these calm stories of the past bring you peace. Your support truly helps me grow and keep making these calm journey through time just for you. And in the comments, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always so wonderful to see our little community listening together from all corners of the world, quietly sharing these stories across space and time. So, settle in, take a slow breath, and let us step softly into the land of the Nile, where each sunrise and sunset tells a story of life, survival, and human resilience. Now let's begin. Imagine opening your eyes not to the quiet comfort of a modern bedroom, but to the dim haze of smoke and the low murmur of bodies stirring in the darkness. You are inside a Viking longhouse, a structure built from heavy timbers and packed earth, stretched long and narrow like the backbone of a ship stranded on land. The air is thick with the scent of damp wood, old straw, and the faint remnants of last night's fire, which still glows in the central hearth. Instead of silence, you hear the shifting of people around you. Men, women, children, and even animals sharing the same space, pressed together for warmth against the unforgiving chill outside. The longhouse is the very heart of Viking life, and waking here is to wake into a world where privacy doesn't exist, where every breath, every cough, and every restless turn in the night belongs to the community. For the modern mind, used to solitude, it would feel overwhelming, but for the Viking, it was home. The longhouse is not designed for comfort, but for survival. Its walls are rough planks or turf blocks, sealed with moss and clay to keep out the cutting winds that sweep down from the fjords. The roof is steeply pitched, thatched with reeds or turf, and supported by beams that creak in the cold mornings. There are no glass windows to let in light, only narrow smoke holes, and by dawn, the interior is still more shadow than brightness. Sleeping arrangements are simple: straw mattresses laid along the sides of the hall, with animal skins or rough woolen blankets thrown across them. Families sleep shoulder to shoulder, their warmth mingling with the heat of animals kept inside during winter months. Sheep, goats, or even cattle might be tethered at one end of the hall, their breaths steaming in the chill, their hooves shifting against the dirt floor. To awaken in such a place is to awaken in a space that feels both alive and confined, a small world buzzing with the shared struggle of survival. The first thing you notice upon waking is the cold. Even with so many bodies pressed together, the night air seeps through every crack and crevice of the longhouse. Your breath comes out in faint clouds, and you draw the rough blanket closer, wishing for more warmth. The fire in the hearth, allowed to die down overnight to conserve fuel, has dwindled to glowing embers, casting only the faintest orange light across the beams above. The smoky air stings your throat and eyes, for ventilation is poor, and every spark of warmth comes at the cost of lingering haze. Someone coughs softly nearby, while another stirs, pulling on a woolen tunic against the chill. A rooster outside begins to crow, muffled through the thick wooden doors, signaling that the day has begun. Unlike today's mornings, which may begin with alarms and electric lights, a Viking morning begins with the sounds and smells of the communal hall, with the weight of survival pressing on you the moment your eyes open. Rising from your bed of straw is no easy matter. The straw, though better than bare earth, itches your skin, and bits of it cling to your hair and clothing. Beneath you, it feels uneven, flattened by many nights of use, and already needs to be replaced. The air is cold enough to bite at your toes as you step onto the packed earth floor, and your body stiffens from sleeping in awkward positions, squeezed beside others. Around you, family members are also rising. A mother pulls a woolen shawl tightly around her shoulders, while children rub their eyes and stretch with little groans of protest. There is no concept of leisurely waking here, no warm showers, no coffee waiting. The day demands attention, and the tasks of survival press forward without pause. For someone from the modern world, the absence of comfort would be shocking. But for the Viking, each morning was simply a continuation of the endless rhythm of life, where warmth, food, and strength were never guaranteed, but always fought for. The central hearth must be revived before the day can truly begin. One of the older children kneels by the glowing embers, blowing gently, coaxing the faint glow back to life with bits of dry kindling. The sparks catch, smoke curls upward, and soon the faint crackle of flame brings a little warmth back to the hall. Around the hearth, iron pots and wooden utensils lie ready for use, blackened by many fires. The hearth is more than a fire. It is the center of life, the symbolic heart of the home. Here meals are cooked, warmth is shared, and stories are told in the dim evenings. Without it, the longhouse would be unbearable. Yet tending it is constant labor, and for those in used to smoke-filled rooms, The eyes would water, the lungs ache, and the throat tighten from the fumes. Imagine trying to breathe here after the crisp, filtered air of modern homes. It would be almost suffocating, yet it is the price of survival in the Viking North. As the fire grows, the hall begins to stir with more activity. The low light of dawn creeps through cracks and smoke holes, faintly illuminating the wooden beams. A man stretches and pulls on heavy woolen trousers, his breath still misting in the air. A woman braids her long hair quickly, tying it with a strip of cloth before beginning the morning chores. Children chatter softly, though quickly hushed by parents, for mornings are not times of play, but of preparation. The animals in the hall shift and bleat, waiting to be taken out for the day. The smell of livestock mixes with smoke and unwashed bodies, creating a heaviness in the air that clings to everything. For a visitor, it would be overwhelming. The closeness of animals and people, the lack of clean separation, the sheer weight of survival pressing on every sense. Yet for the Viking family, this is simply the way of life. They do not expect luxury. They expect only another day to endure. Breakfast is a meager affair. There is no steaming coffee, no freshly baked pastries. Instead, yesterday's bread, hard and dense, is broken into pieces and dipped in ale or buttermilk to soften it. If supplies allow, a bit of dried fish or cheese may be shared, though portions are small. Children chew slowly, their eyes still heavy with sleep, while adults eat in silence, already thinking of the tasks that await. The hearth provides a thin warmth, but the chill seeps through the walls, reminding everyone that the day will be cold and long. For an outsider, this meal would feel unsatisfying, a poor replacement for the hearty breakfasts we take for granted. But in the Viking world, food was fuel, and every bite mattered. Hunger was always close at hand, and no one wasted what little they had. Eating together in the smoky hall is not about pleasure. It is about survival, about gathering the strength to face the labor ahead. As you sit by the fire, chewing on the coarse bread, you cannot help but feel the weight of the longhouse pressing in. There is no privacy, no escape from the sounds of others, the coughing of an elder, the quiet fussing of a baby, the sharp crackle of the firewood. Every moment is shared. Outside, the day waits with cold winds, rough labor, and endless chores. But even inside, the work is constant. The hall must be tidied, the ashes raked, and the straw refreshed. Animals must be led outside, tethered or driven to pasture, and the household tools checked and repaired. Life in the longhouse offers no comfort for idleness, and certainly no place for an outsider to hide. In the stillness of these early hours, you realize that this world demands a strength of body and will that feels foreign to modern life. It is a rhythm of hardship, born not by choice but by necessity. And so, the Viking morning begins, not with ease, but with endurance. The longhouse, with its smoke and straw, its warmth and its discomforts, is both a shelter and a burden. To awaken here is to awaken into a life that demands resilience at every turn, a life where survival is shared and nothing is wasted. For someone from our world, this first hour alone would feel unbearable. The cold, the lack of privacy, the coarse food, the closeness of animals and neighbors. Yet for the Viking, it is simply another day, another chance to endure. As the door creaks open and pale light spills across the packed earth floor, the family prepares to step into the world outside, ready to meet the endless labor and dangers that wait. The longhouse falls behind them, but its weight remains, a constant reminder that in Viking times, survival began the moment your eyes opened. As the first pale light of dawn filters through the cracks in the longhouse walls, the family prepares to face the morning. The heavy wooden door creaks open, letting in a blast of cold air that makes everyone instinctively draw closer to their cloaks and shawls. Outside, the northern sky is a muted gray, the sun struggling to break through drifting clouds. The ground is damp with dew, and the chill of the earth seeps quickly through the thin soles of leather shoes. The Viking morning offers no gentle transition, no softness. It is a reminder that every day begins as a battle against the elements. The winds sweep across the land, carrying with them the sharp bite of salt if you live near the coast, or the heavy scent of wet grass and earth if you are inland. To step outside is to step into a world that feels at once vast and unyielding, where the land demands labor, and the body must answer whether it is ready or not. The first tasks of the morning are practical, rooted in survival. Animals must be tended before anything else. Sheep are driven from the hall into the open fields, their bleating filling the cold air. Cattle shift heavily, hooves clopping against the damp ground as they are led to graze. Goats, stubborn and restless, are tugged along by children too small to resist their pulling. For the Viking, these animals are not mere companions, but the very source of sustenance. Meat, milk, hides, and wool that sustain the household through both feast and famine. Yet the work is hard, often unpleasant. The animals are restless, the ground muddy, and the morning chill bites at bare fingers. For someone accustomed to modern convenience, the effort of simply caring for livestock in such conditions would feel exhausting before the day had even begun. But for the Viking, this was a rhythm as natural as breathing. Survival begins with the animals, for their well-being is the family's well-being. Water must also be fetched, a task more demanding than it sounds. There is no well inside the longhouse, no tap to turn for instant flow. Instead, buckets of wood or leather are carried to the nearest stream or river, often some distance away. The ground may be slippery with frost or mud, the buckets heavy even when empty. Returning with them full of water requires strength and balance, each step cautious to avoid spilling. The water is cold, biting at the hands as it sloshes against the rim. Once brought inside, it will be used for cooking, drinking, and washing, though it is never truly clean by modern standards. To drink deeply from this water is to risk sickness, yet there is no alternative. The Viking morning reminds you again, nothing comes without effort. Even something as simple as water must be wrested from the land, carried back with aching arms, and shared carefully among the family. With the animals tended and the water fetched, attention turns to the tools and weapons of daily life. A man squats beside his axe, running a whetstone along its edge, the rasping sound carrying through the morning air. Another checks fishing nets, untangling the knots formed overnight and mending any breaks with quick, practiced motions. A young boy shoulders a wooden hoe, trudging toward the small field to begin scratching at the damp earth. Every tool has value. Every tool must be ready, for without them, the household cannot function. For a visitor, the sheer weight of constant maintenance would feel endless. Every morning a repetition of sharpening, mending, checking, and preparing. In modern life, so much is disposable, easily replaced. But in Viking times, replacement was a rare luxury, and care for each tool was as important as care for each life. The Viking morning is not simply about waking. It is about ensuring readiness, for the day will show no mercy if you are unprepared. Breakfast, if it can be called that, offers little comfort. Bread made from coarse barley or rye, baked days before, is broken into pieces and softened in ale or thin porridge. The bread is dense and chewy, often flavored more by smoke from the hearth than by any seasoning. On fortunate days, there may be goat's milk or a bit of butter, but more often, the meal is plain and meager. The children eat quietly, filling their bellies with just enough to give them strength for chores. Adults, too, eat without complaint, their minds already turning to the work ahead. There are no luxuries here, no sweet fruits, no warm pastries. Food is functional, not indulgent. To a modern traveler, such a meal would feel insufficient, a poor beginning to a long day. But for the Viking family, it is enough. Hunger is an old companion, and any food at all is a blessing. The women of the household begin their tasks, which are no less grueling than those of the men. Wool must be spun into thread, the rough fibers twisted with practiced fingers until they can be woven into cloth. Looms stand ready in the dim light of the longhouse, where hours of careful weaving will create tunics, cloaks, and blankets needed for the family's survival. Nearby, food is prepared for the midday meal, grain pounded, dried fish soaked, or stew set to simmer in an iron pot. Smoke curls upward again, filling the hall, irritating the eyes as much as it warms the body. Children may help with small tasks, carrying wood for the fire or gathering herbs, their hands learning early that survival leaves no space for idleness. The Viking morning is not divided into leisure and duty. It is all duty, every moment tied to the simple but unrelenting need to endure. Outside, the men take to their fields or the sea. The soil in Viking lands is stubborn, rocky, and poor, demanding great effort for little reward. Wooden plows drawn by oxen scratch shallow furrows, while hands scatter seed with hope more than certainty. To farm here is to wrestle constantly with the earth itself, coaxing food from ground that resists every attempt. For those near the coast, the sea becomes the field, and men push boats into the icy water, nets ready to cast. Fishing is no easier than farming. Storms can rise suddenly, and the sea swallows men as easily as it yields fish. By mid-morning, backs are already sore, hands rough with cold and labor, and the day has only just begun. To someone from our time, used to machines and safety nets, the fragility of such work would be unimaginable. Yet this was the Vikings' reality: to fight the land and sea every day, with no guarantee of success. Even children feel the weight of the morning. There is no school, no idle play. Instead, they mimic the work of their parents, learning by doing. Boys practice with small wooden weapons, clumsy but determined, for one day they may wield iron in defense of their homes. Girls learn to spin, weave, and cook, their small hands slowly growing accustomed to the endless rhythm of survival. To modern eyes, this might feel like lost childhood, but to the Vikings, it was simply preparation. A child who did not learn the duties of adulthood would not survive adulthood itself. By mid-morning, their small voices are heard not in games, but in chores, gathering firewood, tending animals, carrying water. Even in youth, the Viking morning leaves no one untouched by labor. And so the harsh Viking morning unfolds, relentless and unchanging. The fire burns, the animals graze, the tools are readied, and the fields call for endless toil. For a visitor, these hours would already feel draining. The cold air, the coarse food, the constant work, and the absence of comfort gnawing at body and spirit. Yet this is only the beginning of the day. In the Viking world, mornings are not gentle. They are demanding, requiring resilience that few outsiders could summon. Survival here is not a choice, but a necessity, pressed into every breath, every movement, every shared task. By the time the sun climbs higher in the sky, the family is already weary, their muscles aching, their stomachs only half full. Yet they push forward, for the Viking day has only just begun, and the struggles of the morning are but a prelude to the greater demands of survival. By the time the sun has risen higher, spilling a pale light across the fields and fjords, the Viking household is already deep in the rhythm of labor. There is no pause after the harsh morning chores. Work simply shifts into its next, longer phase. The men, women, and children all have roles, each tied to the needs of the family and the land. For the Viking, idleness was dangerous, not just frowned upon. To waste time was to waste survival. The earth, the animals, the sea, each demanded attention, and the cost of neglect could be hunger or worse. The air is cool, crisp with salt or damp with earth, and all around you is the sense of motion. Tools clinking, footsteps crunching across soil, voices calling to one another. For someone from a modern life, where labor is often confined to structured hours, the Vikings' unbroken rhythm of work would feel endless. Yet here, this endlessness was the only way to endure. Farming, though vital, was a constant battle with the land itself. Viking soil was rocky, shallow, and unforgiving, and the short growing season left little room for error. Wooden plows, tipped with iron when fortune allowed, carved shallow furrows in the earth. Oxen strained against their yokes, while men guided them forward, step by step, through the uneven fields. The work was slow, the yield often uncertain. Barley, rye, and oats were the staples, hardy grains that could withstand the chill of northern winds. Women and children followed behind, scattering seeds by hand, their motions practiced yet filled with hope. Each seed cast was a prayer that the earth might be kind, that storms or droughts would not sweep it all away. For a visitor, the sheer effort for so little return would feel discouraging, the kind of toil that saps both muscle and spirit. But for the Viking farmer, this labor was as natural as breathing, a pact with the land that had to be renewed each day. Livestock, too, demanded constant care. Sheep and goats provided milk, wool, and meat, but they were fragile in their own way. A sudden illness, a predator's attack, or a harsh winter could thin a herd quickly. Women spun wool into yarn, their fingers moving tirelessly, while men sheared or slaughtered when the season demanded. Chickens scratched at the dirt near the hall, their eggs collected for food. Cows gave milk that was churned into butter or cheese, though never in great abundance. Each animal represented wealth, survival, and sacrifice. Their sounds filled the air, the bleating of goats, the lowing of cattle, the clucking of hens, a constant reminder that life here was bound to theirs. To modern ears, accustomed to quiet homes and separation from such labor, the noise would feel overwhelming, even oppressive. Yet for the Viking household, these sounds were comfort, proof that their work gave back, however meagerly. Craft was another lifeline, woven into daily toil as surely as farming. Tools broke, clothes wore thin, boats needed constant repair. A Viking household could not afford to rely on trade alone. It had to produce much of what it needed. Men worked with wood, shaping handles, bowls, or beams, using iron tools that were precious and often repaired many times over. Women spun wool into thread and wove it on large upright looms, the creak of wood and the steady rhythm of hands filling the dim corners of the longhouse. Children learned by watching, their small hands eventually guided into the motions that would sustain them. Each stitch, each strike of a hammer, each stroke of a blade carried weight. For an outsider, this constant crafting would feel like endless drudgery, a never-finished task. But for the Viking, it was survival made visible, the transformation of raw materials into the essentials of life. Fishing was another form of toil, and often one of the riskiest. Men pushed small boats out into the fjords or coastal waters, their nets and lines trailing in the dark water. The sea was unpredictable, its moods shifting as quickly as the sky. A sudden wind could overturn a boat, a storm could trap men far from shore. Yet fish were a vital source of food, especially in lean seasons. The nets, heavy with water and hope, were hauled back in, revealing either abundance or disappointment. Drying racks stood ready along the shore, where fish could be preserved for the months ahead. For someone unused to such work, the cold spray of salt water, the burn of rope on the hands, and the endless uncertainty of the sea would feel unbearable. But for the Viking, it was as necessary as the plow, another gamble with nature, another wager for survival. The division of labor was not strict in the way modern minds might imagine. Men, women, and children all contributed, and though certain tasks were more common for one or the other, necessity often blurred the lines. Women might help in the fields, especially during planting or harvest. Men could tend animals or repair household goods. Children, though small, carried wood, fetched water, or guarded the livestock from straying too far. Everyone's hands were needed, and every role mattered. To step back from labor was not an option. The Viking household functioned as a single body, each part moving in rhythm with the others, bound by the unspoken truth that survival left no room for rest. For modern listeners, this would feel relentless, a life without pause, where even the young and the elderly were drawn into the same unending cycle of work. But to the Viking, it was simply life, as fixed and unchanging as the seasons. The longhouse itself required constant attention. Roofs sagged under the weight of snow, walls cracked as the earth shifted, smoke holes clogged with soot. Repairs were made with whatever materials were at hand: bundles of reeds, strips of bark, chunks of turf. Inside, floors had to be swept of straw and dirt, fresh bedding laid, and the fire tended without fail. Even in the place meant to provide shelter, labor never ceased. Smoke hung in the air, blackening beams and lungs alike, yet the hearth had to burn. Without it, the longhouse would be cold and lifeless, unable to protect its people. For a visitor, the upkeep of such a home would feel like a burden, its demands constant and unrelenting. But for the Viking family, the hall was not just a building. It was their shield against the outside world, and its care was as vital as tending fields or animals. As the day stretches on, muscles ache, sweat mixes with the chill air, and hands grow raw from labor. There is little reward for this effort beyond the knowledge that life continues, that hunger may be held at bay for another day. For an outsider, the fatigue would feel crushing, the lack of progress discouraging. In modern life, effort often brings visible achievement, measurable outcomes, and a sense of advancement. But in Viking times, toil was cyclical. You worked not to achieve something new, but to maintain the fragile balance between survival and loss. The crops, the animals, the crafts, the home, they demanded endless attention, and still, disaster could sweep it all away. To endure this rhythm required a resilience that modern minds would struggle to summon. The Viking knew only that labor was life, and without it, life would vanish. And so, the Viking day moves forward under the weight of toil. The fields are scratched by plows, the nets cast into the sea, the wool spun into thread, the longhouse mended once more. Each task is small, but together they form the great, unending labor of survival. For someone stepping into this world, even a single day would feel impossible, the constant demands of body and spirit draining every reserve. Yet the Vikings endured generation after generation, their toil shaping not just their survival, but their legacy. Their sagas, their ships, their raids. All of it was built upon this foundation of labor, upon mornings and afternoons spent in the quiet, relentless work of sustaining life. As the sun climbs higher, casting longer shadows across the land, the Viking family continues their tasks, bound to a cycle that never pauses, never ends, but holds them together in the fragile balance of existence. As the day deepens, there comes a shift in the rhythm of labor. For many Viking households, survival meant more than tending fields or spinning wool. There was another path, one that led outward, across the sea or toward distant villages. Preparing for journeys of trade, raiding, or battle was not a sudden decision, but a way of life, woven into daily existence. Even when peace lingered for a time, the tools of war and the skills of seamanship could not be neglected. The ocean was both a promise and a threat, a road to wealth and a reminder of risk. Within the village, whispers might spread that a neighboring chieftain was gathering men, or that a summer voyage was soon to begin. At such moments, the quiet hum of daily toil gave way to sharper sounds. The ring of iron, the scrape of whetstones, the clatter of wood being shaped into something more than simple tools. For a visitor, the sudden transformation from farming to warlike preparation would feel jarring, but for the Vikings, it was a seamless shift, as natural as the turning of the tide. The first preparations often began with the weapons themselves. Axes, swords, and spears were inspected with care, their edges tested, their handles tightened. A Viking warrior might not possess a gleaming blade of fine steel. Such treasures were rare, but even the humblest weapon was tended as though life depended on it, because it did. Whetstones rasped along iron, sparks sometimes flickering in the dim light of the longhouse. Spears were checked for straightness, their shafts oiled against splitting. Shields, painted with simple designs or left plain, were examined for cracks, their wooden planks bound with iron rims or tough rawhide. To an outsider, the effort might seem obsessive, but in a world where a single blow could decide survival, every detail mattered. The tools of war were not separate from daily life. They were woven into it, like plows or nets, each one a different instrument of survival. Clothing and armor, too, had to be readied. Not every Viking owned mail, for it was costly and rare, often passed down from father to son. Many made do with thick layers of wool or leather, garments meant to turn aside a blade, if only for a moment. Helmets, often simpler than the ones carved into modern imagination, were fitted carefully, their iron caps lined with cloth for comfort. Some carried padded jerkins, stitched with care by women whose hands knew the weight of protection as well as the weight of daily chores. These garments were not glamorous, but they offered what they could, a chance to survive another day. For modern eyes, raised on images of polished armor, the Vikings' equipment would appear crude, but in truth, it was the best balance of what could be made, traded, or scavenged. To wear such gear was not to feel invincible, but to accept the risks of the road ahead. While warriors honed their weapons, shipbuilders and sailors turned their attention to the vessels that carried them. The longship was more than wood and nails. It was the beating heart of the Viking way of life. Crafted from oak, its planks overlapped like scales, bound with iron rivets and sealed with tar. Each ship demanded constant care. Leaks patched, sails mended, oars repaired. Men gathered near the shoreline, their voices echoing against the water as they tested timbers or stretched ropes between posts. Women might sew new sails from wool, their steady stitches binding together the wings that would carry men across the sea. For a visitor, the sight of such preparation would be awe-inspiring, the scale of the effort immense. To the Viking, however, it was routine, a continuation of the same cycle of labor that sustained the home. Only now the work pointed outward, toward the horizon. Food and supplies had to be gathered, for a ship could not sail on steel alone. Dried fish, cured meats, hard bread, and casks of ale or mead were packed carefully into chests or barrels. Water was stored in skins, though it never kept fresh for long. Every bite, every sip, would matter once the open sea surrounded them, where storms could scatter ships and hunger gnawed at men as sharply as any blade. Rope was coiled, spare wood carried, and tools for repair tucked away. The longship was both home and lifeline, and those who boarded it had to be prepared for weeks or months away. To a modern traveler, accustomed to comfort and abundance, the Viking provisions would seem sparse, meager, even cruel. Yet for those setting forth, these small stores were a treasure, the thin line that separated survival from ruin. Training was another part of preparation. Boys who had spent their mornings tending animals might now be handed spears, their fathers correcting their stances, showing them how to thrust or block. Wrestling, sparring, and archery filled the open spaces near the hall. Wooden targets bore the scars of countless arrows, while shields rang under practice blows. This was not formalized like modern armies, but it was effective. Every lesson, every bruise, carried forward. Stories were told of great battles, sagas recited by the fire, not only to inspire but to teach. To modern ears, the idea of children practicing war might sound harsh, even unthinkable. But in the Viking world, readiness was as vital as breathing, and youth was the time when skills had to be learned. A day might come when hesitation meant death, and so training was folded into life as naturally as farming or fishing. Yet not every preparation was martial. Some voyages were for trade, though they carried their own dangers. Goods, wool, amber, furs, and iron were packed alongside weapons, for merchants could become raiders in the blink of an eye, depending on fortune and opportunity. The line between trader and warrior was thin, blurred by the realities of a harsh world. To prepare for sea, even in peace, meant preparing for the possibility of conflict. For a modern observer, this duality might feel unsettling, the lack of clear boundaries between daily labor and violence. But to the Viking, it was practical wisdom. Better to be ready for danger and not meet it than to meet danger unarmed. And so, even the act of gathering goods was shadowed by the preparation for war, the blending of survival and ambition. The village itself shifted during such times. Women managed the fields and animals when the men departed, their labor doubling to fill the gaps. Elders oversaw, their wisdom guiding decisions while younger men trained or readied ships. Children sensed the tension, though they might not fully understand it, their play echoing the drills of their fathers. The entire community bent toward the departure, each member contributing in some way. For a visitor, the atmosphere would feel charged, as if the very air carried weight. But for the Vikings, it was familiar, an old rhythm repeated countless times before. The pull of the sea was as steady as the pull of the soil, and life flowed between the two like the tide itself. And so, as the sun drifts lower, preparations draw toward completion. Weapons gleam faintly, shields rest stacked by the doorway, sails ripple faintly in the evening wind. Men speak quietly, some eager, others heavy with thought. Women press food into packs, their hands lingering just a moment longer as they tie knots. Children watch, eyes wide, perhaps proud, perhaps afraid. To an outsider, the coming departure might feel overwhelming, a surge of danger and loss. But to the Viking, it was the shape of life itself, a balance between home and horizon, between toil on land and risk at sea. The longship waits at the water's edge, its dragon-headed prow gazing outward, ready to carry them toward fortune or death. And behind it, the village stands steady, braced once more for the absence of its sons and the uncertainty of the sea. As twilight deepens over the northern horizon, the role of faith rises quietly into focus. For the Vikings, religion was not confined to temples or single holy days. It was a thread woven into every action, every breath, every hope of survival. Their world was alive with unseen powers, with gods who watched, spirits who lingered, and omens that hinted at fate. Life itself seemed fragile, balanced between fortune and misfortune, and so ritual and belief were constant companions. To the modern listener, accustomed to sharp divisions between the sacred and the everyday, the Viking world might feel mysterious, even strange. Yet to those who lived then, there was no separation. The Norse gods walked beside them in storms and sunlight, in harvest and hunger. The divine was not distant, but close, a presence felt in the flicker of firelight and the howl of the wind across the fjord. The pantheon of the Norse was vast and varied. Odin, the All-Father, stood at the center, a god of wisdom, poetry, and war, feared as much as revered. Thor, with his hammer Mjolnir, offered strength and protection, his name invoked before journeys or battles. Freya and Freyr presided over fertility, love, and prosperity, their favor vital for families and crops alike. Loki, the trickster, stirred unease, reminding all that chaos lurked close at hand. These were not distant beings of perfection. They were flawed, fierce, and familiar. Their stories, carried in sagas and poems, revealed gods who quarreled, bargained, and suffered much like humans. In this, the Vikings found comfort. The divine mirrored their own struggles, guiding them not by flawless example, but by shared endurance. For someone unfamiliar, such gods might seem unpredictable, even unsettling, but to the Viking, they embodied life's contradictions, offering meaning in hardship and hope in uncertainty. Rituals tied this belief to the rhythm of days and seasons. At harvest, offerings were made to Freyr, prayers whispered for fertile fields and fat herds. Before voyages, sacrifices to Thor or Njord, god of the sea, sought safe passage. At feasts, horns of ale were raised in toasts, the first drink often poured to the gods before lips touched the cup. Blood sacrifices, known as blots, were performed at key times. Animals, sometimes even larger offerings, given so the gods might be pleased. These ceremonies were not always grand spectacles. Some were quiet acts at the hearth, a slice of bread burned in the fire, or a whispered invocation beneath the stars. To the Viking, faith was not confined to temples. It was as close as the nearest fire, as ordinary as breaking bread. To a modern observer, these practices might seem foreign, yet they reflect a simple truth. In a harsh world, belief gave shape to hope. Sacred places were scattered across the land. Groves of ancient trees, stones carved with runes, and simple wooden temples known as Hof served as meeting grounds for worship. Here, people gathered not only to pray but to mark community, to share feasts, and to affirm bonds that stretched beyond blood. Fires were lit, songs raised, and stories told, weaving together myth and memory. Imagine the flicker of torchlight against carved beams, the scent of roasted meat mingling with pine, the steady chant of voices rising into the night air. Such gatherings were as much about belonging as belief, reminding each person they were part of a story larger than their own. To stumble upon such a scene as an outsider might inspire awe or unease, but for the Viking, it was life itself, a reaffirmation that even in the face of winter or war, they were not alone. Omens and signs also shaped the Viking day. The flight of ravens, the shape of clouds, the sudden cry of an animal. These could all be read as messages from the gods. Seers and vulvas, women believed to hold prophetic power, were sometimes sought for guidance. Draped in cloaks, carrying staffs, they spoke in cryptic tones, weaving visions of futures that might come. Such figures held both respect and fear, for to hear one's fate was to carry a burden. For modern listeners, accustomed to certainty and science, this reliance on signs may seem fragile. Yet in a world where storms could rise without warning, and survival hung on choices both small and large, the need for guidance, however mysterious, was undeniable. To live without faith, for the Viking, was to drift like a ship without a sail. Stories of the gods were passed down not only in rituals, but in sagas told by firelight. These tales were not idle diversions, but moral maps, guiding listeners through the trials of life. The story of Odin's sacrifice upon Yggdrasil, the great world tree, taught of wisdom gained through suffering. Thor's battles with giants reminded all of the constant struggle against chaos. Even Loki's tricks, dangerous as they were, warned of the thin line between cleverness and ruin. Such stories, told in low voices as shadows danced on the walls, lulled children to sleep and reminded adults of their place in the cosmos. For the modern ear, they might sound like myths, but for the Viking, they were truth. Truth not in detail, but in meaning, guiding hearts and hands through the uncertainty of existence. The weight of faith also touched death. The Vikings believed in an afterlife shaped by deeds and by the gods' will. Warriors slain in battle might be chosen by Valkyries, carried to Odin's hall of Valhalla, where they would feast until the end of days. Others might find themselves in Folkvanger, the field of Freya, or Hel, the cold and shadowed realm of those who died ordinary deaths. Burial rites reflected these beliefs. Ships laid with the dead, grave goods placed for journeys beyond. For modern eyes, such customs might seem elaborate, even strange. But for the Viking, they were assurances that death was not the end, but another voyage, one to be faced with the same preparation as any other. To live without such belief would have been unthinkable, stripping life of meaning in a world already marked by hardship. Faith was not without fear. The Vikings also believed in Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, a final battle when the world would burn and even the divine would fall. This prophecy cast a long shadow, reminding all that even the gods were not eternal. Yet within this vision of destruction was also renewal. For from the ashes a new world would rise, green and alive. To live with such a belief required resilience, to know that all might end, yet to carry on with courage. For a modern listener, such fatalism might seem grim. Yet for the Viking, it was strangely freeing, a reminder that life was precious precisely because it was fleeting, and that honor lay not in avoiding death, but in meeting it with strength. So, as night settles over the village, faith and ritual weave themselves into the quiet. The longhouse glows with firelight, prayers whispered to Odin, Thor, or Freya mingling with the crackle of burning logs. Outside, the wind carries the scent of pine and sea, the sky thick with stars, each one a silent witness. To the Viking, this was no ordinary night. It was another moment under the watch of gods, spirits, and fate itself. To you, listening now, it is a window into a world where faith was not a choice but a necessity, a constant thread holding together lives marked by struggle and uncertainty. And so, in the hush of evening, belief becomes both shield and comfort, guiding each heart through the darkness toward another dawn. As the soft glow of the hearth warms the longhouse, attention drifts to one of the most pressing concerns of daily life in Viking times: food. To modern ears, the word might conjure comfort, a refrigerator stocked, a pantry filled. But for the Vikings, food was never guaranteed. never as simple as reaching for a shelf. It was survival measured in mouthfuls, a constant balance between feast and famine, abundance and scarcity. Meals were shaped by the rhythm of the seasons, by weather and harvest, by the fortunes of hunting, fishing, and trade. A single harsh winter or a storm that scattered the fishing boats could mean lean months ahead. In such a world, food was never taken for granted. Each bite, whether of coarse bread or roasted meat, carried the weight of gratitude and necessity. For those who lived then, eating was not just nourishment. It was a reminder of how fragile life could be, how thin the line was between plenty and hunger. The daily fare of most Vikings was simple. Barley, rye, and oats formed the backbone of their diet, ground into flour for bread or boiled into porridge. These grains were hardy, able to endure the northern climate, though their growth still depended on soil and season. Bread was dense and coarse, baked on flat stones or in clay ovens, often flavored with seeds or herbs when available. Alongside grains came vegetables, cabbage, leeks, turnips, pulled from gardens tilled by hand. Meat was less common, reserved for special meals or when hunting succeeded. Fish, however, was a staple, drawn from rivers, lakes, and seas, salted or dried to last through leaner days. Milk from cows, goats, and sheep provided butter and cheese, though not in the abundance we know today. For modern palates, accustomed to variety and sweetness, the Viking diet might seem plain, even harsh. Yet for those who lived then, it was sustenance, the difference between endurance and exhaustion. Meat and feasting had their place, though they were not daily luxuries. When a cow was slaughtered, it was an event, the animal's flesh salted or smoked, its hide turned to leather, its bones carved into tools. Hunting added venison, boar, or wild birds when fortune favored. Pigs and sheep provided meat as well, though each animal represented wealth and survival, so slaughter was measured carefully. Feasts, when they came, were more than meals. They were social gatherings, affirmations of strength and community. Roasted meats turned on spits, kettles of stew bubbled, and horns of ale passed from hand to hand. Songs filled the air, sagas were recited, and for a few hours, the struggles of survival softened in the glow of fire and fellowship. Yet outside such moments, food was sparse, measured, and plain. A visitor expecting feasts every night would quickly find the reality far leaner, the stomach growling with the truth of Viking life. Preservation was essential. Without modern refrigeration, the Vikings relied on smokehouses, salt, drying racks, and fermentation to keep food from spoiling. Fish hung from wooden beams, their skins toughened by the sun and wind. Meat was salted in barrels, drawn upon in the dark months when nothing grew. Dairy was transformed into butter or soft cheeses, meant to stretch farther than fresh milk ever could. Even beer and mead served not only as drink, but as preservation of grains and honey, safer than water in many cases. The taste of these preserved foods was strong, often sour or salty, far from the flavors most listeners know today. Yet these methods kept families alive through winters when snow buried the earth and the sea froze at the shore. To live then meant learning to endure these flavors, to chew dried fish with weary jaws, to drink ale that had soured, and to be grateful for it nonetheless. Famine always lingered, a shadow never far from the hearth. One failed harvest, one season of storms, and hunger could stretch long into the year. Children grew thin, elders weakened, and the community strained under the weight of scarcity. In such times, survival demanded creativity. Bark from trees might be ground into flour, stretched into bread that was tough and bitter. Weeds and roots, normally ignored, became meals. Livestock might be slaughtered earlier than planned, thinning the herds that were meant to last. For the modern listener, the idea of such scarcity may feel distant, softened by the abundance of supermarkets and supplies. But for the Viking, famine was a familiar terror, one remembered in stories, one feared each winter. It taught resilience, but it also carved scars, silent reminders of the fragile balance between human effort and the will of nature. Despite these hardships, the Vikings celebrated the joy of plenty when it came. Harvest festivals marked the gathering of grain, feasts honored the gods, and victory in raids brought exotic foods and spices from far-off lands. Honey was prized, turned into mead that sweetened gatherings. Rare fruits, nuts, or foreign wines might appear on a chieftain's table, a sign of wealth and reach. These moments of abundance were cherished precisely because they were fleeting. Imagine the laughter of a hall alive with music, the scent of roasted meat filling the air, the warmth of ale in the belly after months of thin broth and bread. These contrasts gave life texture, the sweetness of feasting, the bitterness of famine, each sharpening the other. For those who lived then, survival was not only about enduring hardship, but about seizing joy when it arrived, however briefly. The act of eating itself carried ritual. Before meals, a portion might be set aside for the gods, bread cast into the fire or mead spilled onto the ground. The head of the household often blessed the food, not in distant ceremony, but in simple words of gratitude. Meals were shared from communal bowls, bread torn by hand, meat carved into chunks for passing. Children ate beside parents, slaves beside masters, though the portions might differ. Eating was an act of togetherness, binding the household and the wider community. To the Viking, food was not simply fuel. It was a symbol of survival, of kinship, of faith. Even the humblest porridge carried weight, a reminder that they had endured another day. For the modern mind, accustomed to meals divided and individualized, such communal eating might feel unusual. Yet in the dim glow of the longhouse, it was natural, as much a part of survival as the food itself. For visitors from the present, the Viking diet would be a shock. The coarseness of the bread, the sharp tang of preserved fish, the sourness of ale, each would seem harsh compared to modern flavors. Sweetness was rare, found mostly in honey, a luxury not easily spared. Spices from distant lands were treasures, not pantry staples. Meals lacked the softness and variety we take for granted, shaped instead by necessity and survival. And yet, there was strength in this simplicity. Each meal told a story, of hands that tilled the soil, of nets cast into rivers, of fires that smoked through the night to preserve meat. Eating in Viking times was not only about flavor, but about effort, about gratitude for what could be wrested from land and sea. To survive even a single week on such fare would test the patience of most today, a reminder of how cushioned our lives have become. So, as night deepens, the story of food in Viking times settles like the smoke from a hearth. It is a tale of contrasts, of hunger and abundance, of famine and feast, of plain porridges and grand gatherings. The Vikings lived on the edge of survival, their meals a daily reminder of nature's power and human resilience. To sit in their hall, to eat their bread, to drink their mead, would be to taste both hardship and endurance, woven into every bite. For those of us listening now, it is a chance to reflect, to let the steady rhythm of survival wash over us like waves against the shore. And in this quiet moment, as you drift between thought and rest, the world of the Vikings becomes softer, more distant, a dream of firelight and feasting, of famine endured and joy embraced. Close your eyes and let their story settle gently into the night. As the long shadows stretched across the northern landscape, the Viking world shifted into a quieter rhythm. Daylight faded slowly in summer, lingering long into the night, while in winter, darkness arrived almost before the day had begun. Nightfall brought with it both rest and unease. The work of the fields and forge was set aside, tools laid down, animals herded safely inside, fires rekindled to ward off the chill. For a moment, life slowed. The harsh edges of toil softened by the glow of embers and the murmur of voices within the longhouse. Yet with the dimming light came uncertainty, for the world outside grew dangerous. Wolves prowled the forests, unseen figures could move in the shadows, and spirits of lore seemed to awaken in the silence. Night was a time for both comfort and caution, where families drew close together beneath the weight of darkness, listening to the whisper of wind across the roof. Inside the longhouse, the hearth became the heart of the night. Flames flickered, casting amber light across carved beams and woven tapestries. The smell of smoke mingled with the faint scent of cooked grain or broth, lingering after the evening meal. Around the fire, families gathered, the young leaning into parents, elders sharing quiet words, slaves moving about with simple tasks. The fire did more than warm. It provided a sense of safety, a circle of light against the vast black outside. In this glow, stories began to flow. Sagas of gods and heroes, tales of ancestors, and whispered warnings filled the air. Storytelling was not merely entertainment. It was education, a way of passing wisdom and memory through the generations. For children, these nights by the fire etched the myths of Odin, Thor, and Freya into their imaginations. the gods seeming almost present in the shadows beyond the flames. Beyond the walls, nightfall carried a different atmosphere. The village, once alive with voices and hammer blows, grew hushed. The crunch of footsteps on frost or the creak of a door stood out starkly in the silence. For those who ventured into the dark, whether to tend animals or fetch water, every sound seemed magnified. The rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the howl of a wolf in the far distance. The Norse understood that the world at night was not theirs alone. Spirits, both benevolent and malevolent, were thought to roam freely. Landvetter, the land spirits, watched silently from groves and mounds. Draugr, the restless dead, might rise from their graves to wander. Such beliefs made the dark feel heavier, each shadow holding the possibility of something unseen. To step outside at night was to enter a realm half physical, half spiritual, where fear and faith intertwined. The rhythm of the night varied with the seasons. In summer, the sun barely dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky washed with twilight even at midnight. These nights carried a gentler energy, the air alive with insects, the scent of grass and flowers drifting through the village. Work might continue longer, laughter and song spilling out from longhouses as feasts extended into the dim glow. But in winter, night came swiftly and stayed, cloaking the world in endless dark. The cold pressed in, ice crusted across rivers, and the longhouse became both shelter and prison. For months, life was lived by firelight, the outside world reduced to a bitter void. In this endless night, the bonds of family and faith grew vital. To endure the season meant finding light in one another, in shared meals, in stories told over and over, until spring finally returned with its fragile promise. Sleep itself carried its own patterns. Families lay side by side on raised wooden platforms along the longhouse walls, wrapped in blankets of wool and fur. Children nestled between parents, slaves at the edges, everyone sharing body warmth against the cold. Privacy was scarce, but closeness brought safety. Dreams were not dismissed as idle fancies, but viewed as messages, sometimes from the gods, sometimes from the restless dead. A dream could be a warning, a blessing, or a prophecy, and it might be shared in hushed tones the following morning. Night was not simply a time of rest. It was a time of connection to realms beyond waking life, when the veil between worlds felt thinner. For the Viking mind, dreams mattered. They could shape decisions, inspire courage, or sow unease. Thus, night held not only the silence of sleep, but also the whispered power of visions. Torches and oil lamps offered faint light when needed, though both were costly in labor and resources. A single torch consumed precious wood, and oil for lamps was not easily spared. As a result, most of the night was lived in semi-darkness. Eyes adjusted to the glow of firelight, shadows stretched long, and the imagination filled what sight could not. In this subdued light, time seemed to move differently. The pace slowed, conversations lingered, and the world narrowed to the immediate circle of kin. The darkness pressed against the walls, reminding all who lived within of their vulnerability, but also sharpening the comfort of the hearth. In these moments, night was not merely endured but embraced. Its quiet an interval of reflection, a pause in the relentless demands of the day. For warriors and travelers, night could be far less gentle. Camps were set beyond village walls, fires lit in cautious circles, guards posted against ambush or beasts. Sleep came lightly, broken by the need to keep watch. The sea at night was harsher still, its black waters stretching endlessly, stars the only guides above. To sail in darkness was to enter a realm of uncertainty, each wave a threat, each gust of wind a test of courage. Yet even then, the Norse trusted their gods, their omens, and their hardened will. Night was dangerous, yes, but it was also a crucible. Those who faced it grew stronger, their endurance woven into the sagas later told by the fireside. In this way, night was not only fearsome but formative, shaping the resilience of those who lived through it. Religious belief softened the weight of night. Offerings might be made before sleep, a prayer to Thor for protection, a whispered word to Freya for love, or to Odin for wisdom in dreams. Spirits were honored with small gifts, food or drink left outside the longhouse to appease unseen watchers. These rituals created a sense of balance, a way of acknowledging that night was shared with other forces, both known and unknown. In this spiritual framework, darkness was not empty but alive, inhabited by gods, spirits, and ancestors. To the Viking, night was not to be feared alone. It was to be respected, approached with reverence, and lived through in harmony with unseen powers. Such practices lent comfort, a belief that even in the deepest dark, they were not abandoned. And so, as the night deepened in the Viking world, a hush settled over both land and sea. The fire dimmed, voices grew softer, and the longhouse filled with the steady rhythm of breath, of bodies drifting into rest. Outside, the stars glittered coldly above fjords and forests, their light ancient, their patterns watched with wonder. For a people so deeply tied to nature, the night was not just absence of light, but a presence of its own. A time to reflect, to fear, to dream, to endure. It was a reminder of both vulnerability and strength, of the thin line between safety and danger, life and death. And in that balance, the Vikings lived night after night, year after year, their story shaped as much by darkness as by light. As you listen now, let that rhythm guide you gently toward your own nightfall, soft and steady, like the embers fading in a distant hall. As the Viking world stirred awake from the night, another unseen force held sway over their daily lives: law and justice. Survival was not shaped only by weather and war, but also by the fragile balance of order within the community. The Norse lived in small, tight-knit societies where every action could ripple outward, disturbing peace or reinforcing harmony. In a world without prisons, without constant rulers watching from above, justice was not a distant institution, but a living, breathing presence, woven into the fabric of daily life. It was carried in memory, spoken aloud in gatherings, and upheld by honor. For the outsider, this system could feel both bewildering and unforgiving. To live among the Vikings meant submitting not only to the elements, but also to the relentless gaze of kin and neighbors, whose judgment could weigh heavier than any sword. Central to Viking law was the Thing, a public assembly where disputes were aired, laws recited, and judgments made. Held in open fields or near sacred sites, the Thing was both courtroom and parliament, a place where free men gathered under the sky to shape the rules that guided them. There were no written codes to leaf through. The law was carried by memory, passed down by the law speaker, whose duty it was to recite the ancient rules word by word. Imagine standing there among farmers, warriors, chieftains, listening as the law speaker spoke with solemn cadence, each phrase binding the community together. Justice in this world was not distant. It was spoken into being, alive on the tongue. Yet, for an outsider, standing among stern faces, not knowing the customs or the weight of tradition, the atmosphere would feel intimidating, almost suffocating. Disputes in Viking times could arise from the smallest sparks. A quarrel over grazing land, an insult exchanged during a feast, a debt unpaid, or a theft discovered. Each could ignite tensions. Honor was the lifeblood of a Norseman, and any slight could not be easily ignored. For those unaccustomed to this world, where reputation was as tangible as gold, the demand for respect could feel crushing. Failing to defend one's honor was to invite shame, and shame in this society was not borne lightly. It could stain a family, diminish alliances, even endanger survival. Thus, many conflicts that might seem trivial to modern eyes became matters of grave importance in Viking life, drawing entire families into disputes that could stretch for years. Punishments reflected the harsh realities of the age. For theft, fines were often imposed, cattle, silver, or goods paid as restitution. But not all crimes could be mended with payment. For grave offenses, such as murder or treachery, the punishment was exile or worse. To be outlawed was to be stripped of protection, cast from the community, left to wander as prey for anyone who wished to strike. Imagine the fear of such a sentence, knowing that no roof could shelter you, no kin could claim you, no law could defend you. Death itself was often kinder than outlawry, for at least death carried finality. The edges of Viking justice were sharp, reminding all who lived within it that order was not gentle. It was survival etched in law. Violence, too, was a part of justice, though shaped by custom. Blood feuds could erupt when one family sought vengeance for a slain member, answered in turn by the other side, continuing until resolution was forced. To outsiders, this cycle might seem endless chaos, but for the Norse, it was a grim form of balance. Vengeance restored honor, even as it fueled more grief. Yet within this pattern, there were limits. The Thing might step in to broker peace, imposing fines or marriages to bind warring families. In this way, justice walked a fine line between retribution and reconciliation, between destruction and fragile peace. It was never perfect, but it kept society from collapsing under the weight of violence. For women, justice carried its own complexities. Viking women held more rights than many of their counterparts in other medieval societies. They could inherit property, request divorce, and claim dowries. Yet their lives were still shaped by patriarchal expectations. A woman wronged could seek redress, but she relied heavily on her family's support to defend her claim. To live as a woman in this world meant navigating a balance between agency and dependence, between protection and vulnerability. For an outsider suddenly placed within such a framework, the rules might feel confining, their nuances difficult to grasp. Yet to the Norse, these laws gave shape to society, weaving roles and responsibilities into the fabric of survival. Religion and law often overlapped. Oaths were sworn on sacred objects, such as rings kept at temples, binding men not only before their peers, but also before the gods. To break an oath was to risk not just earthly punishment, but divine wrath. Justice, in this sense, was more than human, it was cosmic. The gods themselves, it was believed, watched closely, weighing truth and falsehood. This intertwining of law and faith added another layer of gravity to disputes. To lie under oath was to jeopardize not only one's honor, but one's soul. For the Viking, justice was a sacred duty, as much about pleasing Odin or Tyr as it was about preserving peace among men. And yet, justice was not always cold. It also offered moments of healing. A fine could close a wound between families. A settlement could restore broken trust. Gatherings at the Thing were not only about punishment, but also about community, about the act of coming together to affirm their shared way of life. In a land so often defined by hardship, law provided structure, a framework for endurance. It allowed disputes to be voiced rather than festering in silence. It reminded each man, woman, and child that they were not alone, that survival was not merely an individual struggle, but a collective endeavor, bound by words spoken beneath the northern sky. For us, imagining life under Viking justice is a reminder of how fragile survival truly was. To live a single day meant not only enduring the cold, the toil, the hunger, but also the unyielding weight of law and honor. To stumble in this world was not a small misstep. It could cost livelihood, freedom, even life. And so, the harsh edge of order pressed against every moment, guiding choices, shaping destinies, and holding the community together with threads of fear, faith, and necessity. As night falls once more across the Viking lands in our imagining, let us reflect on how deeply these people endured, not only through the strength of their bodies, but through the strength of their laws. Their world was unforgiving, their justice unrelenting, and it is in this final truth that we see why you, or I, would not last even a single day in Viking times. And so, our journey through a single day in the Viking world draws to a close. We have woken beneath the heavy rafters of the longhouse, felt the sting of morning cold, endured the endless labor of field and forge, and glimpsed the restless life of sailors and warriors preparing for sea. We have walked among the gods in story and ritual, tasted the meager meals and imagined the great feasts, and watched night fall across the northern horizon with its hush of mystery and unease. At last, we stood before the weight of Viking law, where justice was as unforgiving as the winters, and honor could shape life or death. It is clear, now, why survival here was so difficult. Every hour demanded resilience. Every choice carried consequence, and even rest was shadowed by dreams, omens, and fears of what the next dawn might bring. Yet, in this hardship, there was also strength. Families bound together, traditions carried forward, and stories that would outlive them whispered into sagas and songs. As you listen in the quiet now, let the images of the longhouse fade, let the sound of northern winds grow softer, and let your breath become steady. The struggles of the Vikings belong to another time, another world. For you, here and now, there is only peace, warmth, and rest. So close your eyes. Let the fire in the longhouse dim in your imagination, and allow yourself to drift gently into sleep, carried not by the roar of seas or the weight of battle, but by calm, by stillness, and by dreams. The day has ended, the night has come, and you are safe.